With the new Shinryu era, building units has become a lot more complicated than before. It takes a lot more investment and a lot more enhancement points in order to fully build a character. That's what makes calls so great. You can still utilize a lot of a character through their calls, and you don't even need to build them entirely. They're a great way of still using a multitude of characters and not having to invest so much resources for it. I saw a beautiful comment on my Discord server going very in-depth on a lot of good calls that are viable. In this video, I'm going to narrow that down a little bit more and give you the top 5 calls in the City Opera Omnia as of 2022. Number 5, we have Warrior of Light, one of the OG calls. It's been used in the Lufenia era, the Chaos era, the Lufenia Plus era, and it can still even be used in this era. Warrior of Light has single-handedly the best defensive call if we're not counting debuffs. The Brave Shields are nigh impenetrable for a lot of enemies. They only take up 1 buff for each party member, so you don't have to worry about overfilling your buff slots. A really great thing about Warrior of Light is both his regular call and his LD call give the buff. It's not just the LD or it's not just the regular. Both of them do it, and that makes his effect last a hell of a lot longer in a fight. The only time I would not recommend using Warrior of Light's calls is if you're still charging the FR gauge, and you need to take up a lot of turns in order to do that. But after you're done setting up everything, pop up the Warrior of Light call, you're pretty much good. Amazing defenses, great utility, fantastic longevity. Besides debuffs, Warrior of Light's call kind of has everything. Number 4, we have Rydia. Rydia is a very special case in which her LD and her regular call work very differently. Her regular call is single-handedly the best Imperil enchant call in the entire game. Apart from perhaps longevity, there is no other call that Imperil enchants as good as Rydia's. What's great about Rydia's Imperil enchant in particular, it can actually override elemental absorbing from the enemy. So even if the enemy absorbs water damage, you don't have to worry about that with Rydia. And as a bonus, both her regular call and her LD call drop the debuff. So say if the enemy takes a lot of turns, the first initial debuff runs out, pop up the LD call, the debuff is right back on them. You're not going to find a better elemental Imperil enchant call than Rydia. Also, the other category that Rydia fills very well, her LD buff gives everyone essentially 3 turns of immunity. Immunity from any sort of attack, any debuff infliction. For 3 turns, they're essentially invincible. Yes, of course, there's going to be guaranteed hits and you're going to have to account for that, but for the most part, you have 3 turns of invincibility individually for each party member. That is fantastic, not just in dealing with HP threshold attacks, but also just with insurance. Sometimes the enemy is gonna come here and there and do a random attack that you weren't ready for, and maybe you don't have the right debuffs for it, or maybe you don't have your defenses up yet. With Rydia's LD buff, you're still gonna be able to dodge a couple bit of damage as you're setting up. I think what makes Rydia's call one of the best in the game, in my opinion, it's both fantastic in offense and defense. It's a very versatile call. You could honestly pull for Rydia just for her call. I think it's that useful. Number 3, we have Kate Sith. Kate Sith is single-handedly the best support call in the game. If you want higher brave damage in any sort of the matter, and you don't necessarily have the best support unit for that, use Kate Sith call unless the enemy has some sort of massive brave reduction. You're probably going to be hitting full HP dumps. I love using Kate Sith for if I'm doing Chaos missions or Lufenia missions where I'm using 3 boosted characters and I don't really have a support in that team. You can deal out max damage even without hitting weakness. Kate Sith is a great go-to call to use if you have 3rd slot for a call and you don't know who to use it on. I've been using a lot of Sid Mao recently, and putting Kate Sith on my 3rd party member who's not going to be taking a lot of turns makes it incredibly useful. And Kate Sith's call also works extremely well with burst phases, just to make sure you fully optimize as much damage as possible. And for some more specific Shinryu fights, you're not going to be able to deal damage unless it's critical brave. And also, if you're not able to break the enemy, Kate Sith also works fantastically there. Case in point, if you want to increase your brave damage, or if you just want that little extra support push, Kate Sith, 100% the way to go. Number 2 is Luna Freya. One great thing about Luna Freya is her LD buffs, which grant certain characters in the fight multiple free turns. Her LD call grants the exact same thing. It gives not only the person using the call free turns, but it gives all the units on the right free turns. Luna Freya's LD call is very useful, especially when setting up force times. It makes burst phase setups a lot easier. All All of this makes it one of the best offensive calls to use. It's great for heavy damage dealers who need more turns in order to dish out attacks, and it's also great for off-turn damage dealers. It's great for setting up, and it's great for a wide variety of offense. And if you need it, Luna Freya's regular call also has burst healing. A big part of what made main party Luna Freya broken was her LD. The fact that you can compact that into a separate call to where anyone can use and benefit from it, that's very broken. And now we get to the number 1 spot, which if anyone has played this game for a little while, you probably would know who I'm talking about. I am talking about, of course, Raijin. When I was originally coming up with this list, I was originally looking for calls that would cover a multitude of categories. HP damage mitigation, raising up damage, utility, Imperial Enchant, burst healing. I was looking specifically for calls that could be used in a wide variety of fights. For example, Luna Freya, she has great utility and she can heal. Rydia, she's great for damage mitigation, but she's also great for Imperial Enchant. A Warrior of Light, great defenses, great HP mitigation, and great longevity. However, Raijin, he only does one thing. He drops one debuff from his LD call. That is it. That is all he does, and that's what pretty much everyone uses him for that one particular debuff. However, that particular debuff is single-handedly so good and so overpowered that even though Raijin only does one thing, it still makes him the best call in the game. Raijin's debuff is absolutely bonkers ridiculous. With his debuff on, the enemy cannot deal any sort of damage to you. It increases the amount of HP damage that they receive, and they cannot inflict any sort of debuffs on you whatsoever. So essentially, right, if Raijin's debuff is on an enemy, you're invincible. That is it. So for especially offensive teams, this makes Raijin indispensable. So unless the enemy warps their turn forward, you don't have to worry about HP thresholds. You don't have to worry about getting debuffed. Sometimes you don't even have to worry about the force attack when the enemy reaches 100%. That's usually a bad thing. That's usually scary. That's usually horrifying. But if you have Raijin's debuff on the enemy, guess what? Their force attack is probably gonna do nothing. That's how broken this singular debuff is. So it's kind of cheating in a way that I'm giving the number 1 spot to a call that only does one thing. But that one thing is just so good that it makes Raijin's call way more important than pretty much anyone else. Now, I couldn't necessarily narrow the video down to just mentioning 5 calls. There are also a lot of honorable mentions here. Cid Rain's call, by far the best thing to use before every burst phase, essentially. Prish, great single target damage from her LD. Also, probably the second best call to use for a burst phase. Setzer, his freeze debuff, making the enemy unable to deal damage, is still very invaluable. Iroha, great utility, raising the Brave floor, and also great burst healing. Kais, his debuff of Brave refunding after every launch is still fantastic. And finally, Kurasame. He used to be the best Imperial Enchant in the game. Not so much anymore, but he's still very good to use, especially for newer players. So that's it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you later. Bye!